My greetings to all esteemed English-speaking auditory. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of October the 14th. So like this video, share it, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Of course, leave your comments just below the video. I'll start today's overview with the most active region on the battlefield. That's Pokrovsk Dobropilya region, where Russian forces are directly using their not only infantry but also armored vehicles to attack Ukrainians' position, and this is kind of know-how of the last days. Let's make the overview of this region, and you will get everything what I mean.
So what's happening now near Pokrovsk? First of all, we have the opportunity to watch a video from the Azov Corps of the National Guard, which is holding the defense here. In fact, I'm not talking so much about Pokrovsk itself as I am about the Dobropilya direction. At the center of the fighting here are the settlements of Shakhove and Volodymyrivka. These are the points where the Russians have been applying the most pressure recently. I've explained more than once why these locations are of such interest to the enemy. They are trying to outflank Shakhove through Popivyar and Poltavka, and they have tried to squeeze it from Kucherevyar because Shakhove is like a bone in the occupier's throat, a defensive point that doesn't let them advance even an inch further. And it was precisely this point that, in fact, last week on October 9th, was the target of a large mechanized attack by the enemy, as Azov reported. The enemy used 35 units of armored vehicles. Yesterday as well, the Azov National Guard Corps reported that 16 units of heavy armored vehicles were used. In fact, it turns out that all those that survived the previous attack, 16 armored vehicles, were sent into a new assault with mechanized attacks in this direction again. Let's watch the video from Azov. Once again, I want to repeat and emphasize this point. Why are the Russians using heavy equipment? They didn't use it throughout the entire summer, and not because they were saving it, but because there was no need for it. When there is a cover of green foliage, thanks to bushes and trees, the Russians can advance. Let's put it this way. Their basic objective is to advance. They advance when there is greenery in the summer and early autumn. They move under the cover of foliage. They hide under thermal cloaks, or more precisely anti-drone cloaks, which prevent the thermal signature of a Russian assault trooper's body from being detected as they move through the greenery. These cloaks prevent thermal drones from detecting them, and visual observation among the foliage is very difficult to carry out. Accordingly, the Russians used these very infantry assaults advancing through the greenery. Now you can see that the greenery is no longer as dense. In some places it's completely bare, the leaves have fallen, and yet there is still a need to advance somehow. How do the Russians do this? They use vehicles moving in a taxi mode like this, employing tanks and armored fighting vehicles. During the latest attack, which I am now showing, the Azov fighters demonstrated the destruction of 16 various heavy armored fighting vehicles. That's 9 vehicles. 9 infantry fighting vehicles, 4 armored personnel carriers, 3 tanks, and also 3 motorcycles, which the Russians tried to use to reach our positions as well. The attack took place, as I said, in the direction of the settlement of Shakhove. The enemy's tactics in this context remain unchanged. Last week they attacked this way, and this week they are resuming such mechanized assaults. In the first waves of the offensive, motorcyclists go in, drawing attention to themselves, so to speak, and identifying weak points, and showing how our troops are preparing to respond to Russian assaults. After the motorcyclists, taking into account certain conclusions drawn from these motorcycle assault points, comes the heavy equipment, which, thanks to its armor, is supposed to deliver infantry assault troops on board, bringing them closer to the front lines so they can continue the attack. The task of this armored equipment is to drop off these assault troops so they can secure positions somewhere in populated areas, survive, and then continue offensive actions with the goal of capturing certain settlements. The main area, I repeat, that the Russians are focusing on right now is the settlement of Shakhove. It was precisely at Shakhove that the latest attack yesterday was directed. In addition to the 16 pieces of equipment they lost, also among their losses, 78 servicemen killed and wounded. In the previous phase of the Russian attack, there were about 150 assault troops who were killed and wounded, 200 and 300. Now another 78. In total, that's actually 230-something assault troops over 2 waves of attacks. That's October 9th and 13th, last week and yesterday. This is simply a phenomenal level of personnel losses. Simply phenomenal. This is, well, it's indescribable how the Russians are burning through their infantry, and obviously they will keep doing so with these absolutely senseless and unnecessary mechanized assaults. Even, by the way, Russian propagandists have already started writing that something is going wrong, that they're not attacking the right way. But, well, thank God we have good coordination here. The Azov Corps is here. We have absolutely everything needed to repel this attack, as the Azov fighters reported on their Telegram channel. I'll list the brigades of the armed forces of Ukraine, their artillery crews in particular, the National Guard unit, and the drone forces. Azov gives them the most respect, so to speak. But besides that, the Air Force, the State Border Guard Service, logistics forces, and support forces were also involved because, by the way, they are very actively involved in mining, preemptive mining, and engineering preparation of the area. So the mining here also worked very effectively, very properly. By the way, mining isn't just so that the occupiers get blown sky high by stepping on mines. Mining is also about creating conditions to channel, so to speak, the defense, to drive the enemy into those narrow bottlenecks where our fighters will be fully prepared and ready to destroy them. That's exactly how you need to lead them to those locations where they are to be destroyed. This is also achieved thanks to the engineering troops. Mining, these are very important actions, and in this context, their role should definitely be taken into account. Meanwhile, by the way, on the Zaporizhia front, in the area of Malish-Chobaki, where we've seen some changes recently, Deep State, as you can see, has added a gray zone within the boundaries of Malish-Chobaki. As I mentioned yesterday, it's important to understand that in many locations on the Zaporizhia front, as well as on any other front, what we have is nothing less than a huge, very wide gray zone. You can't call them zones of 100% control over settlements. Rather, these are gray strips that appear in various sections of the front. These gray strips are influenced by both our drones and enemy drones. Both our assault troops and enemy assault troops appear there. So to talk about 1,000% control over certain settlements is in fact not possible at the moment. That's obviously why Deep State adds a gray zone. At the same time, it's worth mentioning that an even wider strip of gray zone has appeared on the map in the Siversk direction area. This is an absolutely enormous gray strip. I'll highlight it, let's say, in black. It's probably the largest section of gray zone along the entire line of contact, across the whole front. What is this and what is the origin of this strip? Deep State explains that as well, although in principle, this gray strip could have been drawn even 2 months ago when the Russians broke through the defenses. Actually, even earlier, when they broke through the defenses at Bilohorivka and started moving towards Serebryanka. This gray zone could even extend to the city of Siversk in this direction, because as I mentioned last week after talking with the soldiers holding the defense here, they admit that the occupiers are advancing towards Siversk as well. Their assault troops are breaking in, so the gray zone can be extended here as well. The logic and origin of this wide gray strip near Lyman is that there is constant pressure from the enemy here without any concrete consolidation. That is, they attack, and attack relentlessly along this entire gray strip you see on the Deep State map. The enemy.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Is present from time to time. They drive him out because these are not densely populated areas. These are just the villages of Dronivka, Hrikhovka, Serebryanka, not such large areas as, for example, Kupiansk. So you could say that, for example, we are basically moving Kupiansk here. Imagine that Kupiansk is being relocated to this spot on the map. If Kupiansk didn't have so many buildings and various plots where you could take cover, it would be exactly the same kind of gray zone. But Kupiansk has an advantage. There really are a lot of buildings there, and there truly are locations where you can take cover, making it much, much harder to hunt down the occupiers. Here, the areas aren't as densely populated. There are a lot of fields, and the Russians, when they go on assaults just along the roads, don't even try to gain a foothold. They try to stick to a tactic of constant, steady, relentless pressure on our positions, plain and simple. They understand that just like along the entire front, we have few troops here, especially infantry units. They simply attack, plain and simple. I also want to once again pay respect to our drone operators who are working both here and in other directions. Here, their presence is especially noticeable and tangible because they are destroying almost all of these gray zone occupiers, detecting them 24/7, eliminating, clearing, eliminating, clearing. Accordingly, this compensates for the shortage of infantry that exists in this section of the front. Deep State also notes the existence of this gray zone. Thank you. It is evidence of the enemy's extremely strange tactics, which do not involve holding territory. Instead, the tactic is simply, and I quote, mindless rushing deep into the area. But that's the reality. And on the other hand, it gives the defense forces the opportunity to kill the enemy, who just pointlessly and constantly terrorizes the positions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces fighters. One such episode of pointless loss of personnel. This is demonstrated by deep state members in the area of Yampil, where right here, across the Zherebets River, the Russians are crossing in boats in order to try to occupy Yampil, something they have been unable to achieve for a long time. However, these boats are being destroyed. By the way, speaking of how they are being destroyed, it's worth making a disclaimer and a brief digression, since I haven't talked about this section of the front for a while. This is the Kherson region, where similarly, in the area of the islands, the Russians constantly send their boats, and this is an absolutely suicidal action because on the open water of a river like the Dnipro, these boats are visible, they're slow, and drones are definitely faster than them. By the way, yesterday I posted on my Telegram channel, you can check it out, friends, how the 40th Brigade of Defensive Forces simply destroys dozens of these boats. Dozens, and it's on an almost industrial scale, the way our fighters do it. They are taking out the enemy there. By the way, you can see the link to my Telegram channel on the screen right now, Pekhno News. You can enter that in the Telegram search bar, or you can find a direct link to my Telegram community in the description of this video. Yesterday, I also posted that video there, which shows that while the enemy may have intentions to occupy the right bank of the Kherson region, they simply do not have the means to carry out such a scenario here on the other side of the Dnipro River. It's simply impossible under the current conditions, with the overwhelming presence of drones, to carry out any landings here in order to further terrorize the right bank, the non-occupied right bank of the Kherson region. But the Russians keep trying, and as a result, they are losing literally dozens of their infantrymen along with dozens of boats there. It's exactly the same situation. Absolutely ridiculous, honestly, downright idiotic for them. A similar situation is unfolding in the Sumy region on our northern border, where north of Andriivka and Kindrativka, there is a sort of small lake or stream, so to speak. In this location, the Russians from Russia are constantly trying to ferry their boats across this river. They are simply being destroyed, just wiped out. Why and for what reason the Russians keep sending such landing parties across, knowing full well that they will all be destroyed? Honestly, I have no idea. I absolutely don't know or understand why this is happening. What I do understand is that our troops have been operating in Crimea very actively and effectively lately. In particular, our main point is Feodosia, which is on the southeastern coast of Crimea. Here is Feodosia. Yesterday, or rather from the night before last to yesterday, there was a very striking hit on Feodosia, specifically on the Feodosia oil depot. This is already the second strike in just 2 weeks. If we sum up how many targets were hit on the territory of the Russian Federation and in occupied Crimea over the past week, over the last 7 days, that's 7 targets hit in 3 different regions of the Russian Federation, plus in temporarily occupied Crimea. The main focus right now is on the power sector. Our fighters are striking 220 to 330 kilovolt substations. In particular, just yesterday in Feodosia, the 220 kilovolt Kafa electrical substation was also hit. The Tavriskaya TPP was also hit, as well as the Simferopol substation and the oil port of Feodosia. This is how it was burning. By the way, this port was struck by Flamingo missiles last week. This week, it's burning very brightly again. By the way, yesterday there was information that it was the Alpha Special Operations Center of the Security Service that struck this oil depot in Feodosia, which is controlled by Russia. The total number of destroyed tanks amounts to 11. 8 with diesel fuel, 2 with gasoline, and 1 was empty. This was reported by the Astra Telegram channel. 800 people from the Feodosia district are allegedly being evacuated by the Russians in order to protect their lives and safety. These strikes on the Feodosia oil depot are very interesting. It's probably the largest in Crimea, and this is definitely a blow to their logistical capabilities. Listen, there's already a huge fuel crisis in Crimea, and now it's going to get even worse. Yesterday, I spoke just off the record with our energy specialists who rate the effectiveness of Ukrainian strikes very highly on the Russian oil, fuel, and gas industry, because as of now, about 30% of Russian oil production has been significantly damaged, and this is causing incredible pressure on the domestic market of the Russian Federation. And the forecasts, let me put it this way, without making, sweeping predictions too far ahead, but the forecasts are that this will put very serious pressure on the Russian economy in the coming months. And this strategy chosen by our military and political leadership seems quite correct to a large number of, I repeat, energy experts. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to talk to them in person, offline, and to hear some rather serious thoughts about the fact that life certainly doesn't seem sweet for the Russians. On that note, I'll end here. Thank you for your attention, friends. Thank you. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and until next time.